Welcome to this podcast produced for Business Lincolnshire as part of the Fit for Business programme. I am Guy Lewis and we are joined today by David Knight from Pect. Hi David, how are you?
Hi Guy, yeah, very well today, thank you.
Good. We've had a couple of chats recently. We've looked at net zero, we've looked at carbon neutral, and we've looked at resource management and behaviours and how you can involve your staff. So what are we discussing today?
So what I thought we'd do today is to think, well, so far everything we've done today is exactly that. We've looked at what we do as a business, we've looked at the carbon impacts, all that kind of thing as well. But I want to look beyond that now, beyond net zero, and think about actually the environmental impacts that we have as an organisation. So net zero can and will have an impact on climate change. And if we reduce the carbon emissions, we reduce the warming that we're essentially doing to the planet and the effect that that has on climate change. Mm-hmm. But it is only one part of the whole puzzle. So there are things that people and businesses can do in order to address and fully protect the planet. So I just wanted to talk a bit about what that means, what else we can sort of include within that, and how that fits together to actually look at not just reducing carbon, but actually looking after the planet in its entirety.
Okay. What's first then?
So the first thing I wanted to do is just to think about, as I said before, with net zero, what that's done is that's really put a lot of focus on carbon. Mm-hmm. So, and again, absolutely fine, because climate change is one of the sort of the biggest challenges we have for our futures, particularly for ourselves and most importantly for our children and their children. So it is right to have it as a big focus for any organization, but unfortunately, what it has done is it really has only focused on carbon emissions, which is directly related to fossil fuel and obviously the energy that goes into the activities. What that's inadvertently done is that it has taken some of the shift away from the environmental focus that we need to have. So things like biodiversity, things like natural landscape, natural environments, these sort of things. So yes, we can cut carbon. Yes, we can make things more efficient. But we also have to think about, well, what are our rivers like? What's the sea like? What are the plastics doing to the world at the moment? What's our legacy?
Okay.
A very interesting point my dad made many years ago is we were in Portugal. We came across a Roman dig site that the university was busy excavating. And he made a very poignant comment to say, well, actually, isn't it amazing that centuries ago, this is what people left us? There's amazing architectural discoveries. In 200 years' time or 2,000 years' time, what are they going to find when they dig up our landscapes?
A lot of plastic.
Absolutely. Waste, rubbish. Just that's the legacy we're leaving. So it becomes, once you have a handle of the carbon and that sort of aspect, and that's a great place to start. The next step and really the future, I guess, is to start thinking about how do we actually make everything better and not just focus solely on this one problem. There's a lot that we need to take into account. And there are organizations out there that are already doing a lot around this, but I just wanted to, again, that's really it. So carbon focus is great, but it isn't everything. We do need to think about the wider aspects as well.
So it's sort of got the headlight on it, hasn't it? That, global warming, rising sea levels, carbon, that's the solution. Solution is net zero gets us somewhere to some stability of almost like the world just running away with itself and ready to implode.
Yeah.
But now we're thinking, okay, what are the other things that are equally important, but they're more they're not necessarily about the sustainability of the planet. They're more about actually the health of the planet.
Exactly that. Yeah. No, and that's the point to it. So if we put carbon aside, and we have talked about this throughout the various podcasts, then the next thing to think about really as a business is waste, and that's a huge impact for any organization. Unfortunately, as with any activity we do seem to create a lot of waste. Whether that's wasted energy is one aspect, but certainly as physical waste that we produce. So, what is it that we are buying? What are we purchasing? What kind of materials are we using within our services and activities? We talked about paper, and what we found, what they have found is actually of all the paper purchased, something like 40 to 50% of that paper ends up becoming waste. So, just in our very nature of how we do things, we need to really think about, well, actually, if we're buying a material just to turn it into waste, there's all of the impacts it has from manufacturing and producing. So paper comes from trees, so we have to cut trees down in order to produce paper. Yes, we can recycle it, but you can only recycle something so many times before it eventually becomes waste, and you have to bring in virgin material in order to sustain the production. So, we have to start thinking about, it's not just about carbon. That's helped to drive the conversation forward, but we have to also think about, well, what are we using? What kind of materials are we using? And most importantly, what are we throwing away? And what can we do to minimize that? So we said before, thinking things about like, is it reusable? Can I repair it?
Yeah.
Avoiding single-use disposable materials. And some of it might not be a simple solution. There's some materials that we may be using which has to be a disposable product because of the nature. So we work within healthcare, and there are certain products which have to be thrown. There's no other choice. It has to be thrown away. But there are still, even within that, there are still some things which can become reusable. It just takes the opportunity to look at it, to understand it, to think, well, what reusable mean? What can I do about it? And then making that choice and that investment. So, the NHS and various healthcare sectors we've worked in, this is one thing they've spent a lot of their time doing, is really trying to identify and remove the single disposable for that reusable, simply because of the waste in which they generate and the impact that has.
Okay, I was just thinking as you were saying that, and I was thinking, maybe there was an era where everything was pre-packaged, and I was thinking about the NHS and the sort of the nurse pack that used to be, and it had everything in it, and then for I don't know, whatever they were doing, a dressing or something, and then it all folded into something and went in the bin. Whereas now, maybe looking at actually there's sets of components, and some can be recycled, some can be washed and re-sterilized. Other things has to go in the bin, but thinking more about that, every business should be looking at that. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. So there's very simple things that you can do as a business to think about. So packaging. So you come onto that topic, so that actually fits in quite well. So a lot of times we buy things, we need things we need for the business, and it comes in a box. And I won't know the names, but sometimes you get a box that's 3 times the size of the product you get into, and all the material fillers that come with it as well.
Can't even think of who you're talking about there.
But that's the sort of thing. So if you are buying something from a supplier, and let's just say you've been working with a supplier for a number of years, but they're just sending you everything individually, so you're getting lots of boxes for something. Well, can they send you one box with everything in it? Do it have to have everything individually wrapped? Are they shrink wrapping cardboard? Are they putting plastic around it? Do they have to put plastic around it? So sometimes when we actually look in our bins, and one of the things we get to in terms of the business is actually looking at what you're throwing away. So what is it that's actually going into your bins in the first place? And then, well, what is actually happening in the business that's creating that waste in the first place? So when we look at a waste process, we look at the inputs, the management, and the outputs. Three sort of things. So the outputs is easy, just look in the bins, what's going there. The management, so that relies on the inputs. So whatever I'm buying in, however I'm managing on site, is now producing a waste. So I either improve my inputs or I improve my management, and sometimes a bit of both. So first and foremost, if a lot of your waste is cardboard, shrink wrap, plastic, anything like that, which is all based on packaging, well, then that's something
you can do something about.
Absolutely. Speak to your supplier, change the packaging. We just don't want, you're paying for that to be thrown away. That's the downside to it. This is a cost to you as a business. The more packaging you have, the more, particularly cardboard, it makes it a lot of space. That's more bin space you need. That's more waste you're throwing away. So get them to cut it down, because ultimately it means that they now use less packaging, which is beneficial for them. And again, if we're looking at carbon footprinting of waste and also the production of materials, that's a bonus. And for you, it gives you less waste to throw away, which then means you now have to worry about less bin space, less process, all sorts of things like that as well. So packaging is a really good one to start looking at first and minimizing that.
I guess frequency as well, then, because you talked about having things delivered individually, not box them all together. But I guess that depends how you order. If you order on a Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday, that they're going to arrive on different days. Whereas if you could maybe have an ordering day from one supplier, and therefore everything comes in one box or one container or one something, that's something to look at.
It is, yeah. So it can come down to exactly what it is you're doing. But ultimately the other side to that as well, just on the delivery aspect, is by actually minimizing the amount of times you order. Obviously that will save on packaging, but now you're also not getting the delivery driver come to you every single day. So again, that has impacts in other aspects. Absolutely. Yeah. So now they're driving less, which means again, less carbon for travel, that sort of thing as well. So yeah, sometimes looking at one problem actually helps solve problems that sits around that as well. So, everything's intertwined, everything's connected, but it is really important to think about, well, actually, what am I purchasing? How am I purchasing it? How much am I purchasing? And most importantly is, what does that mean to my business in terms of what's it costing me? Because I'm always going to have to pay the supplier. That's always going to happen. But there's 2 costs to that purchase. There's the purchase of it coming in, and then there's the cost of it leaving as well. So you do have to sometimes balance the 2 and think, well, actually, do you know what? If I can change how they deliver it to me, and that minimizes my costs, it now makes that purchase more efficient, because I'm now only buying 1 cost rather than 2. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Hi, I'm Guy Lewis and I'm with David Knight, and we're looking at beyond net zero and environmental impacts. So, David, we've talked about the sort of the carbon focus, and we've talked a bit more about some of that environmental stuff as well, and we got onto waste. So, what's the next thing in terms of that waste, that whole sort of circular economy that we hear mentioned?
So circular economy, the term essentially is that's exactly what it looks at. So if we think about, as I said before, when we look at the waste, the inputs, the management, and the outputs. Now, what we want to do within the circular economy is to think about, well, actually, when we're putting inputs into the organization, two things that we need to think about. How can we actually minimize the outputs in terms of waste and bring what we've purchased already, therefore we have a material, and bring it back into the business activity to actually use it again? Because for every purchase, if we can use that 3 or 4 times, again, it makes that purchase more valuable to us. There's also things to think about. So sometimes as an organization, I might produce a type of waste that for me, it's rubbish. I don't want it anymore. But there may be another organization that actually uses exactly what I'm outputting as waste for their input.
So your waste is their raw material.
Absolutely. And that's really what the circular economy is looking at. How can we minimize, shall we say, the amount of virgin resources, so brand new, freshly cut or processed resources into the industry, and actually use it again and again, so that we minimize that aspect and also minimize the waste.
Yeah.
So from
I
a business,
came across a great example of this actually. It was someone that deal with plastics, and they had different coloured plastics, and it all went into the same bin, and it was completely unusable until someone said, "Well, I can use the red stuff, but I don't want the blue and the yellow." So all they did then was just as they generated the waste, they put it into different coloured bins.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the red plastic was a raw material. You could sell it.
And that's it as well. So sometimes that waste, again, you're paying for someone to take that away from you. But if you can turn that into a resource, you now make money off that process as well. And we've seen this with a number of businesses. So, we've had some have really problematic outputs, and they literally had no other choice but to throw it away. However, they exactly that. They got onto a conversation with another business. They said, "Oh, do you know what? That would be perfect material for a thing that we're actually just introducing as a new product." And again, a bit of negotiation. They were able to divert 25% of their waste to this organization. So the amount of money they were paying now cut by 25%, and they're getting income, and they're actually selling it higher than what they were paying to throw it away at. So it's almost win-win for the organization to do that. So that's really the key thing about circular economy, is to think about, well, what is it I'm buying? How am I using it? And what I'm throwing away? Now, the key thing I would say is it doesn't always work for every business. There are sometimes wastes in which we're going to produce that. They're just waste. It's never going to be used by someone else as well. But what the circular economy also tries to push in is thinking about, what am I buying? So as I said before, let's put it this way, back in the past, a lot of organizations just used to talk about recycling. Must recycle. Nothing else. Just make sure that whatever waste comes in, I'm recycling it or I'm putting it into landfill.
Yeah.
We're now at a stage where that's just not good enough anymore. Yes, you must recycle. Absolutely. 100% keep doing that. But what we're doing now is you're still creating a waste that we're paying to be disposed of. So within the waste hierarchy, so there's a sort of a level of how to approach waste. It's actually within the law around how waste needs to be managed. The first 2 points are eliminate the waste in the first place, or reuse the waste where possible. So single-use plastic, single disposable material, this is prime area for this. If I can reuse what I'm buying, I only have to buy it once, and then many, many, many more times buy it again. Whereas if I'm buying it single use, I'm buying it once and then buying it again and buying it exactly. So the other side of it, if I can actually eliminate that entirely, then I haven't got to buy it in the first place.
And that's your primary. That's the first thing.
Absolutely, eliminate it. Try not to try not to create that waste in the first place. That's ultimately the sort of the aim for it. But where I can't do that, think about buying reusable materials where I can use it again and again and again without having to continually buy it. So, from a financial point of view, that just makes sense. Really thinking about what it is that we're purchasing. But also from an environmental point of view, it means I'm now not generating waste, which means there's less impact on the environment in that respect. So, it's really key to think about, well, actually, what's the greater environment? Yes, there's cost perspective to me, but actually from a planet perspective, me putting that waste out there, not putting that waste out there means that it's sort of better for the planet in the long run as well.
So that goes to point environmental. So we've talked about carbon quite a lot. We've talked about the climate change, but you've talked then about protecting the environment. I mean, is there another side that we should be looking at there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess one thing, so the term ESG, so environmental social governance. So it's been named many things before, but this is sort of the later thing. And what that really looks at, so as an organization, your environmental impact is everything we've been talking about today.
Yeah.
So your carbon emissions, that's an environmental impact. The waste you produce, that's an environmental impact. But that all ties into everything as well. So what ESG, what that essentially means is that I'm looking at the environmental impact of my organization, but that environmental impact actually then spreads further. So who am I employing? Who am I working with? How am I helping my workers? How am I improving their lifespan? So the social side of the organization as well then looks at, well, how am I actually benefiting the people that I employ?
Okay.
So that could be things like, by actually engaging with them to think about energy in the office, you actually encourage them to think about energy at home. By helping think about waste in the office or in the business, you help them to think about waste
so it's
at home.
additional benefit.
Absolutely. Things also like, thinking about, well, what kind of wage am I paying? Am I on, minimum pay or living wage or all these sort of things as well. So actually thinking about how do we support the staff that we have and the workers that we have, that has an impact as well. And then the governance. So the sort of how are we managing ourselves as an organization? What are our ambitions? What are, how are we investing our money? These sort of things as well. So starting the environmental conversation then opens up doors to think about the other things that we're doing as well. Now, the key thing to this is when we look at that, one of the biggest benefits it has, and I mentioned this on an earlier podcast, this is what people are looking for. They're looking to work for businesses that have this mindset, that are doing these sort of things. So if you want to attract new employees or young talent or anything like that, starting to look at this now and developing those sort of landscape and profiles and actually start to look at it as a whole and then communicate it, talk about it, demonstrate what you're doing, you now become a more attractable organization. So not only are you now minimizing your environmental impact, which has a direct cost relation to yourself, you're also now becoming more attractable as an organization, which again has the benefit of bringing in new talent, bringing in staff as well. So everything you do, no matter the reason why you're doing it, this all benefits the organization in the long run. So when we talk about sustainability, we're not always talking about like the whole climate thing. We're actually talking about you as a business, your sustainability. And by managing your sustainability, you actually have those intended consequences of improving your environmental impact as well.
Okay. This is the last one of the podcasts we've done. I just want to summarize in a way, what are the best, the best things we can do now? What's the sort of the simplest or the largest impact? Is that what we should focus?
Absolutely. So I guess the takeaway I would say from everything else is keep it simple. That's ultimately it. Don't get bogged down in the jargon. Don't get bogged down by the big terms. None of that really matters. It doesn't matter what you call it. All that matters is what you do. So for an organization, for where you are within this journey, the most important thing is do something. Even if it's just measure your resources now. Just do something, measure your resources. And then once you've done that, look at the next step. Okay, what can we do now? We've got our resources. What's the next thing to do? Okay, so what are we using? Why are we using it? Where can we make improvements? Make that cost reduction that inadvertently has that carbon impact. Measure your carbon footprint. So you don't have to tackle, I'd say there's organizations, I don't have to tackle everything at once. We can't fight every fire that exists. We can only focus on what's in front of us. But that's the most important. Put something in front of you that you can focus on. Take a simple action and generate an impact from it. And then as you start to do that, you'll start to become more aware of where your impacts sit. And that actually helps you. So if you want to make a large impact through a simple action, you have to understand what that is in the first place. So that's really what I'd say to any organization. Just start somewhere. Start at the real basics. Start with what you have. Start with the information you have available to you. Start to measure it. And then start to make simple changes. And eventually those will lead to bigger changes in the end.
Really good advice. David, thanks for joining me on this set of podcasts looking at sustainability. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
You've been listening to a Business Lincolnshire podcast. Look out for the next episode. If you're listening on the Business Lincolnshire YouTube channel, don't forget to give us a thumbs up or subscribe down below. If you're on your favourite podcast platform, then remember to follow the show. More information at businesslincolnshire.com.